driving on the beach can be really, really awesome fun, but things can also go horribly wrong, and generally when you least expect it. We normally travel alone, and so you need to be extra careful and have plans for the unexpected, which happen really quickly. So how do you drive safely on the beach? Firstly, you need to plan the tides. That's probably the most important. The tides differ up and down the coast, so when you do a search for the tides, do a search for the area where you're going to be. Getting a tide in Auckland when you're going to be in Christchurch doesn't make any sense, and they will be different. So search the local area for the tides where you're going to be. Tides change roughly every 6 hours, but not exactly 6 hours. So the highs and the lows change every day. The other thing to note is that the lows are not always the same. So if you look at the chart, you'll see that the lows can vary. One day it'll be 1.3 meters, the next day 0.8 meters. So depending on the phase of the sun and the moon, the tides will change, and you can get a really low low, and sometimes it'll be a high low, so to speak. I normally plan to drive about 2 hours before the low and until roughly 2 hours after the low. So that gives me 4 hours of driving, and by then the water hasn't got too high. So why do people lose vehicles when they drive on the beach? When I arrived in New Zealand, a friend of mine said, let's go and drive on the beach, and I had a van at that stage. I hadn't bought my 4x4 yet. So we jumped in his car, and he said he'd checked the tides and everything was perfect. So we drove all the way up the beach and all went well. At the top of the beach we turned around. It was getting dusk, and driving back down the beach it became dark, and the tides were wrong, and we had 2 waves break over the car, and at that point we got stuck. And it's pointless trying to dig out when water's breaking over the car, because as you dig out, the next wave fills the hole. So it's a perpetual cycle, and that's how you lose things and you lose your vehicle. Luckily for us, in the distance we saw some lights, and somebody who'd got lost was driving past. He hooked us up and pulled us out, and we got out. But we were just lucky. All these other wrecks and the photographs of the wrecks were all taken on the same beach. So if you get things wrong, things can really go wrong. The next very important thing is tire pressure. So you get your tires right, you get your tires right. What I can't understand is these people that say, well, we'll deflate a little bit, and then when we get stuck, we'll deflate some more. In my opinion, that's crazy. And deflate properly once, and then you're fine. So I normally drive on 0.8 bars, that's 12 psi, and that works for me in all directions. Your tire and your rim will determine the pressure, because some tires and some rims tend to come off easier. For me, 0.8 is fine, and if I really have to, I can go down to 0.6, 0.5, so that's 8 psi. If I'm at 8 psi, I've got to drive in a straight line or very carefully turn. I can't turn sharply because the tire will come off the rim. So I get my pressure right, and there we go, and then it's not a problem. The next thing to consider is quicksand. Quicksand happens or occurs where a granular material like sand gets saturated with water and it loses its carrying capacity. So this can occur anywhere where there's water underground, and often it would occur next to a lagoon, a lake, a dam, a river, and normally it will be on the same water level. So if you camp or stop above the water level, the water will not get to that level and you should be fine. But ask locals. I always suggest you stop and ask locals in the local area, is there quicksand? You see some other guy driving on the beach or fishing, stop and ask him, and they will be able to tell you. But just be careful, and yeah, it's not easy to identify, so you've just got to be careful. I always stop above the water level, and like that you're generally safe. Sand conditions also change on a number of these beaches that you see in the video. The first one, within 3 kilometers, the sand goes from so hard that you could drive a normal car on it to really deep ruts where at 8 the car is struggling. Just some other advice is, if there are ruts and they're not too deep, stay in the ruts, because you'll find that the tracks have already been compacted, so it's much easier to drive and the sand is a little bit harder. Otherwise, drive on another bit of sand and give that a bash. But the sand conditions change, so be aware of that and just take it into account. Again, if you've deflated your tires enough, then it's fine. The other thing which is important is to keep momentum. Don't stop in positions and situations that could become compromising. When I'm driving on the beach or in dunes, I always stop facing downhill. It's easier to pull away going downhill than uphill, so always turn that your vehicle's going facing slightly downhill. The other really important thing is, if you get stuck, stop immediately. You drive past these people and they're sitting there, the chassis is already resting on the sand and the wheels are still turning, and they're turning the steering wheel left and right, and they're just making the situation worse. So when you get stuck, stop immediately. Turn the car off and dig away the sand that's causing the problem. And firstly, deflate your tires more. I was with a friend the other day and I said, "Oh, you've deflated." He said, "Yes, I've gone from 2.8 bars to 1.8 bars. In my opinion, that's not deflating your tires. So if you get stuck, I was driving in the dunes alone. I got stuck and that was at 8 bars. So I reduced my tire pressure to 6 or 5. So that's about 6 or 7 psi. I dug away all the sand in front, behind of the wheels, and the sand that the chassis was resting on. I then engaged the locker and I drove out very slowly, making sure that I didn't spin. But if I'd sat there like an idiot and let the wheels turn and turn and turn, it was a half an hour recovery, and it would have probably been 3 or 4 hour recovery. So I also get stuck, but I stop immediately, and that really makes a big difference. To summarize, deflate for the worst possible conditions before you start driving. Secondly, check the tides. Make sure that you've got all your recovery gear with you. If you're driving alone, have a decent spade and have max tracks or something like that if you don't have a winch. Also consider rust. So once the waves have broken over your car a few times, even if you get out, make sure that you wash the car and get all the salty water off. I protect my car with lanolin. You can look at my other videos, and that tends to work. On trips where I'm going to be in the middle of nowhere, I have a satellite phone. I use Inmarsat. The other thing is, take a personal locator beacon. It's probably the best advice and the best investment you'll ever make. So cover all your bases and enjoy your time on the beach. And don't become a statistic or like one of these pictures. Have a good one. See you next time. Drive carefully.